Alrighty, well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining the 8th Annual Delaware Watershed Forum virtually. Today's session is on watershed education activities for young and adults, brought to you by Penn State Extension. I just want to cover a couple housekeeping things before turning it over to our speakers. So as a reminder, today's session will be recorded. It'll be shared on our website early next week. That way, if you want to reference anything, you certainly can, or you can share along to folks who hadn't had a chance to join us this week. We are going to mute everyone, so if you do have any questions, feel free to input any questions in the chat box function. We'll do our best to answer them throughout the presentation. And at the end of it, we'll also have a Q&A with our presenters too. If you are having any sort of technical difficulties, please message me directly. My name is Kelly Knutson. I'm the State Policy Manager with the Coalition of the Delaware River Watershed. Happy to assist you as much as I can remotely. Lastly, the schedule for this conference is on sketch.com. We are encouraging folks to select which breakouts they'll be attending, as well as providing feedback through our website so we can improve this event for years to come. All right, at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer, and I'll stop sharing.
Great, thank you, Kelly, so much. I appreciate the introduction and the housekeeping details. So my name is Jen Fetter. I am a water resources educator and our program team lead with Penn State Extension. And I am joined today by my colleague, Brad Kunsman, who you're going to see on video in a little bit here. We're trying to be as interactive as possible with you in a virtual setting. Our hope was when we came to the forum to actually give you all the opportunity to get hands-on with some activities and think outside the box about how you can adapt them to your own settings and your own needs. But, you know, things really are not hands-on these days because it turns out touching things that other people have touched is the worst possible thing we could be doing right now. So we're going to do our best to demonstrate and show you some stuff, give you some time to share some of your own ideas and experiences as well as we go through today's presentation. So just to give you a rough idea what our objectives for the talk today are, we're going to be talking a little bit about why youth water education matters. I may be preaching to the choir on that a little bit, but I want to make sure that we're all on the same page. And then we're going to talk a little bit about using youth activities with adult audiences as well. That is a common practice for us now, but something that didn't come to us originally, and it sort of came along organically in the process. We'll be sharing some resources for coming up with some really good activities, and then specifically demonstrating 2 activities that we use that you might be able to use as well. So I want to kind of start off by getting to know all of you a little bit with a poll question. So if you could just tell us what audiences you are currently providing educational programs for, if at all. You can check as many of these boxes as you want. And there is a none option down at the bottom if you aren't really providing educational programming currently. I'll wait until most everybody's had a chance to check the box. I'll give you a little background about who we work with while you guys are checking the boxes. So Penn State is an academic institution, but at Penn State Extension, we don't really work with the academic audience. Our role in Extension is actually to take the research-based material from the university out to the non-academia audience. So the general public or specific stakeholder groups like municipal governments or K through 12 students or homeowners or business owners or farmers. We work with specific stakeholder audiences, but all outside of that traditional academia audience. And every state in the country has at least one land-grant university, if not more, and those land-grant universities is where Extension lives in every state. So if you're not in Pennsylvania, there's Extension in New Jersey at Rutgers, in Delaware at University of Delaware, in Maryland at University of Maryland, just kind of touching on various in New York at Cornell. So we have extension all across the country. So just I'll share with you so you can see what everybody else answered. That looks like the majority of you are working with the general public, but also with elementary and middle high school youth. So that's great, but we've got audiences running the gamut here, and that's great because we work with pretty much every age audience as well, and we try to come up with and adapt these programs to all audiences. So with that, let's talk a little bit, like I said, first about why youth education matters. So we've, as adults and conservation professionals and hydrologists and industry workers, are all putting a lot of effort into improving our water quality and providing good water quality for ourselves and for the future. But it would be all in vain and a lost cause if we don't help the next generation now learn how to maintain and even do better than we've done with our water quality. We certainly don't want our youth being the next generation of decision makers, undoing all the work that we're doing now. I think we would all find that to feel rather devastating. Another thing that is really important, we find youth getting engaged in things like helping with litter cleanups or tree plantings. But when they do those projects, they look like community service to them. And if there's no ownership to community service, it's really more like punishment to most youth than it is an opportunity to grow a stewardship mentality. So if we use, 6 hours of community service as the remediation, and that's the only kind of community service that youth ever become exposed to, they won't have a sense of wanting to do community service because it's their community and they own it. And so education really helps with creating that sense of ownership. And then this last bit here, so this is something that is Pennsylvania specific. I didn't ask you to tell me what state you're from, and maybe that's an oversight, but I don't think it is. We here in Pennsylvania hear an awful lot about the Chesapeake Bay watershed because it does make up a large portion of the state, but we have more than one major river basin in Pennsylvania. That said, a lot of the direction that we are headed in Pennsylvania in policy and in educational goals is somewhat driven by what's happening in the Chesapeake Bay, because that is driven by a presidential executive order. And our state agencies have decided to adopt much of that on a statewide basis instead of in a basin specific basis, because it makes resources and opportunities available to all of Pennsylvania's citizens and not just those folks living in the Bay watershed. And so one of the things that has been adopted statewide is to do MIWIs in Pennsylvania schools. And you will say next, what the heck is a MIWI, right? So if you've never heard of a MIWI is a meaningful watershed education experience. This was something that was developed by the Chesapeake Bay Education Work Group out of NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. But they implement MIWIs across the country, not just in the Chesapeake Bay, and they provide funding and grant opportunities in a handful of major target basins to help make MIWIs happen. And they're starting to be adopted by a lot of other organizations because they have been showing promising results. And so the Department of Ed here in Pennsylvania has adopted them as a statewide initiative as well. And we are trying to help get the word out about them. So even if you're not in Pennsylvania, these are, it's basically a framework and an approach to providing water education to youth in a way that's going to be meaningful and help them to really grow and have the biggest impact as future community members and decision makers. So basically the framework of a MIWI, so that you know what it is having the kids think about an issue in their community around water and come up with some of their own questions about why they might have. So if there's, you know, a specific issue that we might be hearing about water in the news in their community, we might help them come up with some questions. You know, why is this stream impaired, or why is this drinking water not safe, or, you know, why do we have to increase our tax revenue to pay for a stormwater project, or whatever's happening around them. And then they go out into the field and do their own data collection. So these are things that teachers might already be doing in some capacity, but maybe just not the whole framework. So you think stream studies, right? That's a great example of an outdoor field experience where kids are going out and collecting data. They're counting the number of macroinvertebrates, or taking water quality samples and applying the data. And they're probably even doing the synthesis and conclusions part, learning what those data they collected, what they mean and what the implications are. But then they're ending with a stewardship and civic action component. And that's a really key part to the MIWI, is making sure that they actually take the next step and do something, implement some kind of solution in their community that's related to the outdoor field experience they did and the conclusions they drew to the question they were asking. And sometimes these things happen a little bit out of order, but it's a really cool process and we highly encourage it. If you're looking for more information or trainings, there's actually a MIWI 101 online course that's available for free on the NOAA website. And we absolutely encourage you to go out and find that and go through the kind of 101 process and think about how you could apply this to the work you're doing. Not every interaction with a child in a water education environment is going to be a MIWI. Obviously, this is a pretty in-depth process. You might just play a small part in a MIWI as your role in the organizations that you work for. You might not have the time or the ability to spend this much time with a specific group of students, but you might come help with an outdoor field experience or help them understand the issues in their community that they might want to ask questions around, or you might have scientists that can help them analyze their data and draw conclusions, or you might be a group that's looking for volunteers to help with a stewardship or civic action project in your community that would relate to something that students are already working on investigating in their classroom. So you could all play a small role in this process, or you could play a complete role in it. That said, that's the student side of this watershed experience, but we do want to talk a little bit about applying the youth activities we're going to talk about today and any youth activities you use to adult audiences as well. Sometimes we forget how much adults enjoy hands-on learning experiences as well. Plenty of adults signing up for sewing, gardening, cake decorating classes, fitness classes, right? These are all up and moving and hands-on and fun things. And so when we have the opportunity to interact with adult public, we sometimes stick to just the lecture or the discussion and conversation, sort of what we're ending up having to do today in our virtual environment. And it's not as engaging and it doesn't necessarily always have the same impact. So we encourage you to think about how you can apply some of these youth hands-on activities to your adult audiences as well. So just a quick conversation on where you might find resources for youth water activities. Perhaps you're already getting ideas and resources and tools from your local or state parks or even national parks and agencies around your community. You might be familiar with Project WET, which is a national curriculum full of water education activities. There's national programs like Trout in the Classroom. There's lots of nonprofit organizations out there that have some of their own custom-made educational activities. And then, as I mentioned before, there is extension in every state. Here in Pennsylvania, we have a 4-H program as part of our extension, which works directly with youth. We have our Master Watershed Stewards program, which Brad's one of our county coordinators for, and I know a handful of our other Master Watershed Steward coordinators have been at the conference this week, and you may have already interacted with them. We have our Master Gardener program as well, which also exists in most other states, as well as the 4-H program. So lots of opportunities to interact with extension and connect with them to get some of those different education resources that might be available from them. That said, I want to take a minute and give folks a chance to share in the chat pod what activities are you already using to teach youth or the general public about water? Are there any activities out there that you really love that you want to share about and tell others about? So take a minute and drop a couple of ideas into our chat pod, and I'll sort of watch them come through and talk about them. We have kind of a big group with 34 people, so I don't want to open mics right now. We might do that in the end of the session when we've got some time for open discussion, but just to keep things moving along because we have a lot to show you today. Does anybody have any activities or ideas that they're already using? So Bainey is sharing about the river survey from the Watershed Institute. Kim's talking about doing macroinvertebrate sampling and stream studies. Anybody else? Volunteer stream monitoring programs, that's cool. Teaching about stream quality and macroinvertebrates, fishing, archery, and hunting heritage, doing stream cleanups, nature discovery hikes, a scavenger hunt. That sounds great, a scavenger hunt app. I would actually love to see that if you get that put together. I was actually working on a scavenger hunt tool today as well. Using the Enviroscape, that's a great one. Those are kind of expensive, but they are really amazing teaching tools. There's a Trout Unlimited involved with trout in the classroom in New Jersey, kayaking, family programs, a fairy festival, whatever it is, sounds amazing, and I want to come attend that. Those kinds of things can really draw people in. So these are great. I love that everybody's got different things going on, and I want to draw attention to the fact that there are lots of things you can do, and I couldn't possibly spend this session telling you about all the amazing water education activities that are out there, but we are going to highlight a few, hopefully give you some ideas and then demonstrate and give you some stuff. If you're really into water education, if this session really stimulates you or you were already fully engaged in water education before you came to this session today, I do want to let you know that there is a biennial conference in the region that we host called the Dive Deeper Summit. We have it every other year in person in the Harrisburg area, which is about a 2 to 3 hour drive from a lot of the Delaware River watershed if you are interested. This year, we are not meeting in person like many other conferences. It had to be adjusted to a virtual setting. So we're calling it Dive Deeper Distantly this year. It's just a one-day conference. Not multi-day, but all we talk about is teaching about water. We provide opportunities for others to share their resources, new technologies that you might use as educational tools, and plenty of networking opportunities. So in the chat pod, Brad shared the link to the Dive Deeper Distantly Summit if you're interested and want to take a look at that. It's not too late to sign up for this year if you'd like to. He also shared a link to Qualtrics form. That's our kind of survey tool that we use at Penn State because we do have some scholarships available for both Pennsylvania and Maryland educators this year. We got sponsorships from the Pennsylvania Department of Education and also from the University of Maryland Extension Sea Grant to support educators coming to the conference. So if you or someone you know educates in one of those two states, they could complete that Qualtrics form and apply for and likely receive, because we have quite a number of scholarships available, free full coverage for the conference, but it's really not that expensive. It's only $30 at this point. The early bird's over, but it was a pretty affordable conference. I do not have any sponsors coming from New Jersey this year. Bainey, I apologize. Yeah, it's a very low cost conference. So we'd love to have you join us if you want to, full day of just talking about resources and teaching about water. So very cool. So we're going to demonstrate two activities for you today that we developed over a number of years and have fully vetted and tested and now have available as kind of professionally printed curricula and publications. And I am going to turn on a feature at this point called Spotlight Video, which is hopefully going to make it so that the only video you see on your screen besides the screen share is Brad. I think at this point, the rest of the gallery hopefully has disappeared for you. Depending on what view you're using and what tool you're using, you might want to change to side-by-side view instead of gallery view. You probably have a couple of view options, and you can actually drag the screens so that Brad's bigger or smaller, or the slide I'm showing is bigger or smaller. If you're having trouble seeing Brad though, let us know in the chat pod, because we really want you to be able to see him while we're talking about the activities. You don't need to see my lips moving necessarily unless that's helping you to understand what I'm saying. I'd really rather you focus on what Brad's doing on the screen. So the first activity that we're going to be talking about is called Rain to Drain, Slow the Flow. And this is a stormwater education curriculum. It's really cool. We absolutely love it. I still can't believe it works as well as it does because it was a spontaneous brainchild once upon a time, many years ago. Feels like many years ago. It was like 2013. The mission behind this curriculum was to create a tool that could be used in a group setting or classroom setting with multiple ages, and that all the tools were readily available and incredibly affordable. So everything that you need to do this activity is something you can get at the grocery store, or you might even have in your kitchen already, or at the very least at a big box store that you can go out and get stuff. We're talking tinfoil muffin pan, throwaway cups, an empty soda bottle, some sponges. It's pretty simple materials to get your hand on and don't cost a whole lot to get. This curriculum is available for free on our website. It's a PDF download. You can download the whole thing. If you want to, you can also purchase it. We'll show you the links for that later if you want nice printed copies of it, but that is 100% free to you as a PDF download. And so the idea is that the muffin tin represents a model of a community. So we're trying to build a 3D model in our community. And we want to explore and look for where water goes when it rains in our curriculum, when it rains in our community. I'm using too many syllable C words today. Right, so Brad's holding up the muffin tin, right? So we think of each of the wells in the muffin tin as a parcel or a property. And one of them is colored in blue, as you can see in Brad's muffin tin there. And I'm showing you on the screen the little map drawing that's in the curriculum book that the kids can see as well. This is 5 land parcels and 1 water. And depending on where you're teaching the activity and the group of kids you're working with, we always encourage you to give the water a name. So for today, we're going to call it the Delaware River, because that's what we're all doing here at this conference. We're talking about the Delaware River, but it could be something really small, right? It could be just the Tahican Creek, or it could be just a pond in your neighborhood. Or if you're working with a group of kids that don't have any open water right immediate to their neighborhood or community, it might even be the storm drain on the corner of the street that you're working on, or on the corner of the school lot that you're working on. But we try to connect them to a local water feature, because we're going to be looking to see whether or not our storm water stays on the land or ends up in our body of water. And so the way we set this model up, the muffin tin represents above ground, but we also want to be thinking about what's happening underground. So the cups represent underground. And so Brad's going to just set these 6 cups up. We usually do this on a tray of some sort because there's water involved in this activity. And depending on where you're working, you might not want water all over the place. So Brad's going to set the muffin tin right into the 6 cups. And you'll see one of the cups is colored in blue as well. because that's sort of the base flow, the underwater portion of our Delaware River today. The other thing he's going to do is take a roll of tape. He's just going to slide it underneath the cup that's furthest away from the Delaware River, give our land just a little contour, and put the Delaware River at the bottom of the hill, because that's where our water collects, is at the bottoms of hills, right? We don't usually see rivers and lakes balancing on the peaks of mountains. When we start out this activity, we're showing what happens to stormwater and rainwater in a natural community. So Brad's going to take a piece of sponge and stick a piece of sponge in each of the parcels. Our natural communities, think about what it was like here 500 plus years ago before we came along and had a lot of human influence on the landscape. Our natural communities are really spongy. Much of the Delaware River watershed was forested or pine barrens, right? So we have a lot of really absorbent, spongy soils that can soak up a lot of stormwater. And what Brad's gonna do is make it rain on our natural community. This curriculum is set up in such a way that you could spend a whole week working with a group of students and doing a scientific experiment where they're collecting data, recording values and amounts right in their project book, in the curriculum guide. Or you can do this as a really fast 5-minute demonstration, almost what we're doing today, at a table, at a community fair, a county festival, there's table events that you guys have. You can just set this up and go real fast without measuring. And Brad's not gonna do the measuring today. He's just gonna pour water right into his rainmaker, right, which is just a soda bottle that has had some holes drilled in the cap. Works as an effective tool. If you want to make it really visual, impacty, you can glue cotton balls all over the outside of it and make it look like a cloud, which is a lot of fun. So Brad's just making it rain all over our natural community. And then what we're going to do is look to see where the water ended up. Did it become groundwater? Did it infiltrate in our properties, or did it become runoff water and end up in the Delaware River? And one thing I didn't mention, but Brad showed you on the screen, is that we poke holes in the bottom of the muffin tin as well, in case you're wondering how the water got out of there. I forgot to say there's holes poked in the bottom of the muffin tin as well. So Brad's showing us where the water's ended up. He's showing us our 6 underground cups, our groundwater, which represents infiltration. Right, and he can show us the one blue colored cup, which is the Delaware River, and how much water became runoff. And so just by looking at those, and you can also see the soils have absorbed a lot of the infiltration as well, which Brad is showing you in the sponges as part of the activity. So we see a lot of infiltration and just a little bit of runoff in our natural communities. And that's about correct, right? So there's some water that ends up in the river just based on the rain that fell directly over the river, and just a little bit of water that runs off. In our natural communities, in a forested community, up to 15 inches of rain per hour can infiltrate into the soils, which is astounding. In our front lawns, we get less than an inch of rain per hour infiltrating, because most of our front lawns are so compacted that they act almost like concrete. So Brad's dumping all the water out of the cups so that we can do this activity, our experiment again. We're gonna change one variable, and that's gonna be what's on the landscape. So now we're gonna look at kind of our modern day community, our developed community. When we look out the window and in our own neighborhoods, we don't see natural community all around us. We see a lot of developed surfaces. So Brad has 5 cards that have been laminated. The cards are a cutout copy page in the curriculum. So all you need to do is figure out how to get them laminated. It's actually the hardest thing, the hardest material of the entire activity is getting access to a laminator. If you have one, then it shouldn't be hard at all. If you don't, the big box office supply stores often will do lamination for you for a reasonable cost. So you can cut these out and take them with you to one of those stores and get them laminated. So they represent common developed surfaces we see in our communities. Brad's got one that's a roadway. You can see the yellow stripes down the center. So he's going to add a road to our community. He's going to build it right over top of those spongy natural community soils. We have one that's a sidewalk, right? Another paved developed surface. We see a lot of sidewalks in our communities. He has one that's a parking lot there. All right, so he's going to add a parking lot to our community. We have one that's a rooftop, other one. It's the brown shingles of the roof. You can see it more clearly when you look at it in person. So he's going to go ahead and add a rooftop. So we have all our houses with roofs. And he's got one more there. It's just concrete. Because boy, don't we have enough concrete all over our communities that could represent just about anything in your community. You can call it whatever you want. So now that Brad has developed over top of all of those spongy natural soils, what do you think is going to happen to our rainwater this time? So Brad's going to go ahead and make it rain. We're going to see where all of our stormwater goes this time. And this is why we use a tray, because you can see even in our expert implementation, we get spills and splashes, especially in a developed community. So there's Brad making it rain all over. And again, you can do this as a demonstration. In fact, you can set up 2 or 3 of these models side by side, so you don't even have to take the time to break it down while you're doing the activity. And you can just move from natural community to developed community. We'll tell you what model 3 is in a minute. Hopefully you can start to guess where we're going. So Brad's gonna lift the model up and show us where the water ended up this time. And we can see a very, very full Delaware River cup, lots and lots of runoff from our rainstorm this time. And that's what we expect to see in a developed community, and no infiltration. We have empty cups and no groundwater recharge. So there's a couple of different lessons you could explore and talk about here. One is flooding. If you have communities with lots of flooding, this will help people to understand why our waterways might be going over their banks more frequently than they used to as we add more developed surfaces in our community. If you have a community whose public drinking water supply relies on groundwater, or you have a lot of families with private drinking water supplies or wells in your community, you can have a conversation about the lack of groundwater recharge and how that might influence their drinking water supply. And there's a handful of other conversations we can have as well. We'll talk about some of those extensions and expansions in the end of the project here. So what we end up doing with this activity is leading to what could our community of the future look like. And so we start to explore green infrastructure and introduce the participants to different types of green infrastructure they might see in their community. So in the book, there are pages you can print out and have available, or you can have the kids have each of their own book. But on those pages, we introduce 6 different types of green infrastructure and then a way to represent that on our model. So the first one here is pervious pavers and stone pathways. And so Brad's got a little cup full of rocks there handy. And if you wanted to have, instead of maybe a sidewalk or a driveway in our community, we've got pervious pavers. He can pour these stones over top of one of the sponges to represent a pervious pavers type sidewalk or driveway. Oh, he threw a rock in the river. The next one is green rooftops. So we use our rooftop card from the last community, the developed community, but we put a piece of green felt on top of it to help absorb some of that storm water and hold it in place. So Brad's gonna add a green roof to our community. We have permeable pavement. So this is asphalt that's designed with pore spaces to allow water to infiltrate and pass through. And on the model, we represent that with a piece of needlepoint canvas, like cross-stitch canvas. The plastic grid is strong enough to kind of stand up on its own, but has big holes in it. And then we have 2 more laminated cards, one for bioswales and curb cuts, so showing how our roadways and our parking lots can have areas that allow water to leave and go into planted garden spaces instead of just being directed to storm drains. So Brad's going to add our cutout parking lot card for that. And then we also have rain gardens, and our concrete now has been converted to concrete with a place, again, for water to run off and be directed into a rain garden of some sort. So Brad's going to go ahead and add that as well. The 6th practice is actually preserved open space in natural areas in our communities. And if you wanted to have preserved open space, you can just leave one of the sponges completely uncovered and restored natural as a natural community, as Brad did in the model. So we offer 6 different practices because there's only 5 properties to build on, and that means it gives your participants the opportunity for some variation. They can set it up however they want. Normally in an experiment situation, we actually introduce the idea of just one new member of the community. A new neighbor moves in. Maybe they moved here directly from Portland and they have very good green infrastructure exposure and experience, and they decide they're going to convert their driveway to pervious pavement, or they're going to preserve natural area, add a rain garden on their property. And we have the kids repeat the activity in the experiment with just one practice in place and see if that's enough to restore our reduced runoff and increased infiltration. And then we go on to allowing the kids or the participants to design their own green infrastructure community and make it rain as well. And before they make it rain, if you're doing the full experiment, we actually ask them to develop a hypothesis about how much water will be runoff and how much will be infiltration. I'm not going to have Brad demonstrate that for you because I want you to do the activity and see what happens when you build the model using the green infrastructure and see if you can get our developed community to behave the way our natural communities did. I think you can be optimistic about that. But Brad's getting ready for our next activity while we kind of wrap up. So just wanted to show you there are a couple of pages in the curriculum called Beyond the Experiment that offer extensions and opportunities. One is to introduce how stormwater moves pollutants. You can use Kool-Aid powder, similar to the way we do with the EnviroScape model. If that's something you're familiar with, you can sprinkle that on the developed surfaces and show how those particles of Kool-Aid get carried downhill into the Delaware River or whatever your body of water is through the movement of stormwater. There's also some instructions in there about how to use the stormwaterguide.org website, which is an interactive GIS mapping tool to actually map the property that you're on and calculate the square footage of impervious surface and how many gallons of stormwater runoff are generated using, this is really better for older kids, but it's a great way to introduce them to some basic GIS skills, which is really awesome. And then there are some other continuation activities in there that lead kids to thinking about community service and what kinds of projects they can do in their community. So again, this is available on our website. Brad provided the link. You can download the PDF for free, but you can also purchase printed copies of the curriculum, and we do sell kits with all the materials in them. If you like the simple life, that's perfectly fine. They're probably a little more expensive than it would be if you just go out to the store and buy all the pieces yourself. But take a look and you'll find those. So I'm just going to stop for a second and look at the questions that have been coming in about this activity before we move on to the next one. So if you have questions about rain to drain and you want to ask them in the chat real quick, please feel free. This curriculum, Tally's asking whether or not it aligns with curriculum standards. So yes, we have the standards for Pennsylvania and for the next generation science standards, which have been adopted by a lot of states across the country, available for rain to drain. So this does have standards alignment. It focuses a lot on the science of motion and forces, which are typically taught in the middle school level. So if teachers are looking for perfect school alignment, the standards that we use the most are the middle school standards. And yeah, Suzanne, you could cut out the concrete surfaces and asphalt from other surfaces as well. You could totally make up your own if you want to and save yourself the trouble of having to get things laminated. And it does seem pricey if only teams of 2 or 3 kids do it. We tend to encourage maybe 2 or 3 setups for a classroom of 20. You really could have like 8 kids around a setup. I've done it many times that way. There's plenty of jobs for everybody in the activity between building the community, setting up and measuring and being the rain cloud. So you can have more kids in a group. You can really get away with doing a whole classroom for under $50 if you do some good price comparison shopping. That's what we've experienced. So it's not too bad. And the pieces are mostly all reusable. There's not much that gets wasted over time. So all of that's there for you. I'll come back to questions in a little bit. The other activity we want to show to you is our Watershed Decisions activity kit. This one we don't have a PDF download for because it really is, you really do need the parts for this activity. Once upon a time, I made all of these in my office, spent a lot of time cutting things and coloring. It's not really what Penn State was paying me for, but I loved it. And I love this activity so much, but I mailed them out individually from my own desk. We do get these printed by a vendor now instead. The cost is still really permissive. I think it's like $39 for a classroom set, which has 2 setups in it. So we try really hard to keep it as affordable as possible. This is a role-playing game. It's an inquiry-based activity kit. It's really great for helping people understand what watershed associations are and how we make decisions as a community to help protect and restore our waterways. So essentially, what happens in this activity is the participants read the morning news headline about a local creek being impaired, and Brad's holding up a map of the watershed that we're going to be using for this activity that comes, it's a vinyl, so you can spill water all over it and use it over and over again. But the headline is all about who declared the stream impaired and what it's impaired with. We're focused on nitrogen and sediment. They're fairly universal impairments. We talk about getting the creek cleaned up and that the local watershed association has grant money to clean up the creek, but they need help figuring out what projects to use the money on and how to prioritize that. And so all the participants show up as new volunteer members of the Watershed Association. And the other handout for this activity is an agenda that tells them what they're going to be doing at the meeting, but it's also basically the lesson plan in a nutshell. So the activity includes analyzing water test results, identifying the land users in the watershed, exploring different best management practices and improvements, and then presenting back a plan on how they plan to spend their grant money on this activity. It's so much fun. It's really great. So analyzing water test results, there's a couple of envelopes that come with this activity. They have cards in them. And for the water test results section, each card represents the water test results from a different point in the watershed. So on the map that Brad has there, there are circles that are lettered, and each of the cards shows you the water test results from each of those letters. It tells you how much nitrate and what the turbidity is, the sediment in the water. And there are instructions for how to visually represent that. So it's fun and hands-on. There are 8 little cups that come with each setup. And on the bottom of each cup is a little Secchi disc so that we can help interpret the results. They come as stickers. They're like the reverse window decal stickers, so that they show through the cup, but the sticker's actually on the outside so it doesn't wear off when you put water in the cup. And then follow the instructions for adding food coloring. It's the one thing we don't sell you, because we tried that once and the food coloring busted open in shipping and everything was destroyed by the time it got there. So you just got to buy your own little box of Easter egg style food coloring, the 4 little dripper bottles in the same box. You need red, blue, and green for this. So you can lay the cups out on each of those points on the map, fill them halfway with water, and follow the instructions on those blue cards Brad was showing you. Add this many drops to represent nitrate, add this many drops to represent sediment. And then what we do is have the participants look at all the cups in the watershed and figure out where the water quality is the worst. And depending on your audience, this is a great time to talk about the types of tests they could actually do as volunteers in a watershed association, and how a lot of those tests are interpreted either through colorimetric testing, so comparing color and how dark it is, or using a Secchi disc or a similar tool to see how turbid the water is, whether or not light can pass through it. And so they determine that the worst quality water is not up at the headwaters, but it is down at the mouth of the stream where it empties into the next waterway at its confluence, where the water is dark. You can't see the Secchi disc in the bottom of the cup anymore. Lots of opportunity to add in different engagement and education here. And then there are 10 land users, or 10 pictures around the watershed of different types of land users. And we ask folks to point the finger, figure out who's to blame, right? Who do you want to accuse of polluting the watershed? This is a really common misconception and misunderstanding in a lot of communities, that if a stream is impaired, the people who are causing the impairment must be the ones who live closest to where the impairment is. And so this is an opportunity to help correct a misconception. Most general public audiences and kids will point the finger at the land users down near the mouth of the stream where the water is the dirtiest. So we have the different land users are very typical of a mixed use watershed. There are rural housing communities and rural land uses like livestock farmers and crop farmers, but there's also concentrated housing developments, new construction sites, wastewater treatment plants, big box shopping centers, industrial sites. So we got a really good mix of land users in the watershed. Once they've pointed the finger, we send them out to actually investigate who the land users are and what kinds of pollution they're generating. And so there's a new envelope called investigation results, where we have 10 cards to match the 10 land users, and they can spread these out amongst all the different people working in their group and read them aloud and learn about what's happening at each of the different land use sites. And what they learn and conclude is that everybody's contributing pollution, no matter where they live in the watershed, and they're all contributing a relatively similar amount of pollution. It just might be different. The livestock farmer might be contributing more nitrogen, the construction site might be contributing more sediment, but they're all contributing to the impairment in the waterway, that everybody has a role to play in helping to protect our water quality. And so now they're tasked with coming up with a plan to restore the watershed. And the last envelope in the activity is the best practices and improvements. Brad's doing an amazing job of being a dad to a young toddler, not even quite toddler, while he's showing us the activity. I'm so proud of him. So in the best practices and improvements envelope are 13 best management practices or other improvements that can be made in the watershed. On the front side of the card, it tells you what the practice is and how much nitrogen or sediment it can reduce. And on the back side, it gives you a brief description and explains like what no-till farming is, so that everybody understands what practices they're considering spending their grant money on in the watershed. And they're tasked with figuring out where to implement 4 practices. They've got enough money. That's the one variable that's not perfectly realistic in the activity, because we had to take something out to make it easy. Everything costs the same amount of money for the sake of argument in this activity. So they can pick 4 activities, no matter which one they want to implement, and they can pick 4 different locations to implement those activities, or they can do them all in one place. Each card tells you where it's logical. Like one of them is an animal waste management system. You obviously wouldn't be able to implement that in a big box shopping center that's meant for a farm. But there's also increased wastewater treatment plant capacity. You could only do that at a wastewater treatment plant. So there's lots of different things happening in this activity. We sell this kit with 2 setups as a minimum on purpose, because we want at least 2 groups doing this simultaneously. The idea is there's no right answer. There's no one perfect solution. Depending on the backgrounds, the experiences, and the lives of the participants, they're going to have different reasons for choosing the practices they want to pick. And that's the same thing that happens in real life in a community when they have a limited amount of resources and funding to spend on water quality protection and improvement. They're going to have different rationale and different reasons for deciding what practices are most important and what are priorities in their community. Maybe the ability to maintain certain practices is just not possible for one type of landowner versus another. Maybe what one person considers beautiful or a aesthetic improvement for community, another person thinks might be ugly or something they don't want in the community. Maybe some landowners are resistant to implementing a particular practice in their community. Maybe they don't want pervious pavement. Maybe they don't want rain gardens. Maybe they don't want green roofs. So it's a really cool experience to listen to two different groups present their plan and talk about why they chose what they did and how they came to their conclusion. So that's the Watershed Decisions activity in kind of a nutshell. It was a whirlwind. It's a lot of fun. I'm looking at questions here. Tally asks about ages and grades for Watershed Decisions. This is really designed for middle and high school youth as well as the general public. I have used this with incredible success with decision makers in a community, municipal governments that don't really understand how or why a conservation group might be making the decisions they are around restoration. I've used this with farmer groups where folks who live in headwaters areas where water is not impaired don't understand why they might need to be implementing practices on their farms as well as the people downstream where the impairments are. So we've used this with all types of groups. I've had educators use this with younger, like upper elementary groups, but they need a lot more direction and guidance and explanation for what's on those BMP cards. So you might need some modifications and adaptations for that as well. We do provide some additional tools in the curriculum. And again, we have academic standard alignment available for this activity. Brad's just showing you the two activities. Again, the links are in the chat pod for them. I do want to point out that we have I mentioned before in Pennsylvania, our Master Watershed Stewards program. These are highly trained volunteers who could help you with your educational programs. If you live in one or operate in one of the counties where we have Master Watershed Stewards, there's a link on the screen there and also in the chat directly to the program website where you can see what counties we have programs in currently. We highly encourage you to tap into them. They know these activities and can help lead them as well for you. They're a really cool bunch of folks and super motivated to get out there and help with educational experiences. So with that, I'd like to take a little more time for some sharing. I know we're running out of time in our session and folks are gonna wanna take off here soon, but let's take a couple of minutes. I wanna know what you came here today hoping to find an activity for. If there's a specific water issue you were hoping you would walk away being able to teach about, to let us know that in the chat. Let's start there, and if there's not a lot, maybe we can have some out loud conversations and do some unmuting as well. But I'd really love to know if there's a topic in particular you were hoping, because we can point you towards some specific activities to help you get to some materials that'll help you. And I will stop. Oh, it looks like the spotlight turned off at some point. My apologies. Not sure when we lost that, but hopefully you could see Brad and all the materials as he was holding them up the whole time. He's still there waving to us. Doesn't look like anyone had any specific, I don't know if you were looking for things specific around teaching kids about safe drinking water or around, we have curriculum available with activities in it around manure management for kids. So if you've got youth working in or raising animals on small hobby farms or as 4-H projects or FFA projects. Their manure influences water quality, and it's really great if you have a source water protection area that includes agriculture and you're looking for tools and activities for getting kids engaged in reducing the environmental impacts that their animals have on your water. We can talk about activities for that as well. There's Brad sharing the link to the MIWI 101. We'll just call him Vanna from now on. I think that's perfect. He's an amazing demonstrator. I would have absolutely loved to give you guys a chance to do this hands-on, and I do apologize that you didn't get a chance to play and do these activities in person. Hopefully next year or sometime in the future, we can revisit all of these and new activities and more that we can get out there for you. It doesn't look like anybody was looking for anything in particular today. So just so you have it, Brad and my email addresses, so that you could reach out to us in person if there's specific questions you had that you didn't ask today. Kelly's posted the link to our survey for feedback on this session. So please do take a moment to click on that in the chat pod as well. Brad and I will stick around if you do want to unmute and ask questions. And please, as Brad said, we really hope you can join us at Dive Deeper Distantly as well if this is something that's super exciting and you really want to get more into it. We have a question. It came in privately, so I'll just leave it anonymous, about teaching high school students that maybe don't think protecting the environment is important. And yeah, it's really hard to start at the high school level to build that stewardship mentality, but it can be done. I absolutely encourage you to build direct connections to maybe what's happening in their own neighborhoods and in their own schoolyard first, so that they can make a very personal connection to water quality. One of the things I discourage is taking kids on a field trip to the perfect stream site for a stream study, to a remote park or to some institute or center as their only experience, because they often walk away from that thinking that's the place where the water is, that's where a watershed is, not where I live, not my community, it must not be important. In particular, if you've got a very urban school, I had great success with actually taking the kids on a walk around the block, around their own high school in the city, and keeping a tally of every single thing they saw that could potentially pollute their own local water quality. Talk to them about their own flooding issues when their own streets and neighborhoods flood. Talk to them about the boil water advisories they have experienced in their lifetime, the experiences that they've had with the water right there in their own city and where the water goes, and just kind of following that pathway. And then I've actually, if you can build a connection with whoever manages the stormwater system, I've found they get super excited when they feel like they've really accomplished and done something. So if they find like a clogged storm drain that's filled with trash because people have been using it for litter, to see if you can't work with the stormwater authority or municipal authority that manages the storm drains, get them to come out and demonstrate the effort that they have to go through to actually clean out that storm drain, and then maybe even engage the kids in their own creative capacity for designing and painting a mural around that storm drain after it's been cleaned out, to educate about water when it goes in the storm drain. So there's just some ideas for getting some really good buy-in into those experiences. So other questions, anything else? I appreciate it. Kelly's pointing out there is one more session today, so if you're headed to another session, please do feel free to jump off and take the breaks you need, get up, walk around, get some steps in, relax your eyes. I'm told, you stare at your computer 20 inches away from your face all day. You should take 20 seconds to stare at something 20 feet away instead. Relax your eyes and calmly get away from the computer screen. So make sure you take your time there. Thanks, Brad, for your help.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Question about relating the work to trout in the classroom. If you want trout to survive in streams, they need to be high quality streams. And so you can just take these lessons of how land use impacts water quality and relate them back to where you're going to be releasing your trout, where they go, and what the quality of that waterway is, and why we don't have more trout rated streams, what's wrong with our streams that make them not possible to be trout rated streams, would be my immediate connection back to trout in the classroom with these couple of activities we talked about today.
Thank you, because it's sometimes hard to get the next level of student into an activity once they've been through TIC.
You got it. You bet.
So,
yeah, help them think about where they released their trout and why you had to go somewhere special for that and you couldn't just put them in any old stream would be a really great connection.
thank you.
Yeah, sure thing.
And I hate to cut this short. I actually facilitate the next session, which is currently going on.
All right, go ahead, Kelly. Thank you.
No
See you
worries.
guys. Thank you all so much. Have a great day.